I've seen you laugh more at a funeral than in our bedroom." Those words cut through the air at the Livingston family barbecue as Christopher raised his beer bottle in mock toast. Everyone laughed. His mother, Margaret, his father, Vincent, his sister, Jennifer. Everyone except Barbara Livingston, who stood frozen, the plate of carefully arranged appetizers trembling slightly in her hands. It wasn't the first time her husband had publicly mocked their intimate life, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the way Margaret's eyes lingered on her with that mixture of pity and judgment, or how Jennifer leaned over to whisper something to her boyfriend, both of them stealing glances in Barbara's direction. Barbara placed the appetizers on the outdoor table and excused herself to the kitchen. 33 years old, with honey-blonde waves and striking green eyes that once radiated confidence, she now moved through spaces like a ghost, careful not to disturb the air around her. The cool interior of the Livingston family home provided momentary refuge from both the summer heat and the searing humiliation. "Need help with anything, dear?" Margaret's voice preceded her into the kitchen, that saccharine tone that never quite masked the criticism beneath. At 58, Margaret Livingston was still striking, her silver-streaked blonde hair perfectly styled, her clothing expensive and tasteful, a constant reminder of the wealthy East Coast family Christopher had been born into. "I'm fine, thank you," Barbara replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She busied herself arranging deviled eggs on a serving platter, focusing on making each one perfect. "You know," Margaret began, leaning against the counter, "I found the most interesting article about how to spice things up in the bedroom. I could forward it to you." She delivered this with the same casual tone one might use to recommend a recipe for banana bread. Barbara's fingers tightened around the serving spoon. "That won't be necessary. Christopher just wants what any husband wants," Margaret continued, as if Barbara hadn't spoken. "Men have needs, and when those needs aren't met at home—" She let the implication hang in the air like a threatening storm cloud. Through the kitchen window, Barbara could see Christopher gesturing wildly, clearly in the middle of another story. His father, Vincent, laughed appreciatively, clapping his son on the back. At 60, Vincent was still imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same charismatic smile that Christopher had inherited. Father and son, cut from the same cloth, always protecting each other. "I'll keep that in mind," Barbara finally responded, picking up the platter and moving past her mother-in-law. The words were automatic, a defense mechanism developed over 2 years of marriage into the Livingston family. As a business administrator who'd graduated at the top of her class, Barbara had once prided herself on her ability to solve problems, to find logical solutions to complex situations. But this, the constant undercutting, the public humiliation, the way Christopher had systematically dismantled her confidence, this defied logic. When she stepped back outside, Christopher immediately caught her eye. "Here she comes now. My beautiful, brilliant wife," he announced, his words slurring slightly. "Tell them, Barb, about how you organize our bedroom activities like quarterly business reviews." Jennifer snickered. "Complete with PowerPoint presentations? And performance evaluations," Christopher added, triggering another round of laughter. Barbara set down the platter with deliberate care. "I think you've had enough to drink, Chris." "See what I mean?" Christopher stage-whispered to his family. Always managing everything. It hadn't always been this way. When they'd first met 3 years ago at a corporate function, Barbara representing her management consulting firm, Christopher there with the marketing team of his company, he'd been charming, attentive. He'd pursued her with an intensity that had been flattering. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Romantic dinners, weekend getaways, long conversations about their dreams and ambitions. The change had been so gradual that Barbara hardly noticed it happening. First came the occasional jokes about her being too serious. Then the complaints about her work schedule. After they married, the criticisms became more frequent, more pointed, often delivered with a smile or in front of others so that any objection from her would seem like an overreaction. Barbara's just so proper, you know? Christopher was saying now, his arm draped around his sister's shoulders, like she's afraid to let loose. I keep telling her, life's not a board meeting. Jennifer nodded sympathetically. Some women just don't understand what men need. Barbara felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the prelude to panic that she'd become adept at suppressing. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7, out for 8. The grounding technique her therapist had taught her. No one here knew about the therapy sessions she'd started 6 months ago, seeking help for what she'd been convinced was her own inadequacy. "Excuse me," she murmured, stepping away from the group. No one seemed to notice her departure. Inside the house, Barbara locked herself in the powder room and gripped the edge of the sink. The woman in the mirror looked back at her with eyes that didn't quite recognize themselves anymore. Where was the confident professional who'd built a reputation for razor-sharp analysis and decisive leadership? When had she started believing the narrative Christopher had created about her? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, an email notification from work. Even on a Saturday, Barbara remained connected to her responsibilities as senior administrator at Westfield Financial. Work had become her sanctuary, the one place where her competence wasn't questioned, where her contributions were valued. Christopher had tried to undermine that too, suggesting she was compensating for her frigidity by being a workaholic. The phone buzzed again, this time a text from Christopher. "Where are you? Mom's serving dinner." Barbara took one last look at herself in the mirror. "This can't continue," she whispered to her reflection. She didn't know then how right she was, or that in less than 24 hours she would discover the truth that would shatter the carefully constructed fiction of their marriage. Back at the table, Vincent was regaling everyone with stories of Christopher's childhood achievements. Even in high school, he was a natural salesman. "Remember that time you talked your way out of that suspension, son?" Christopher grinned. The principal never knew what hit him. "DT, my boy has always had a gift," Vincent continued proudly. "Barbara, you're a lucky woman to have landed such a catch." Barbara nodded automatically, the motion as empty as she felt. Across the table, Jennifer was scrolling through her phone. "Oh, Barb," Jennifer looked up. "I just sent you a link to this amazing book, Satisfying Your Man, the complete guide. I think you'll find it enlightening." She exchanged knowing glances with Margaret. Barbara felt her phone vibrate with the incoming message, but didn't reach for it. Instead, she focused on cutting her meat into perfectly even pieces, each slice a small act of control in a situation where she felt increasingly powerless. "Always so focused," Christopher commented, noticing her methodical cutting. "Even eating is a strategic operation." As the family laughed again, something inside Barbara shifted. A subtle realignment, like tectonic plates before an earthquake. She didn't yet know what had changed, only that something had. The seed of a question planted itself in her mind. What if the problem wasn't her at all? Little did she know that this question would lead her to discoveries that would change everything. Revelations that were hiding in plain sight on Christopher's laptop, his bank statements, and in the increasingly frequent late-night phone calls he took in whispered tones on their apartment balcony. For now, though, Barbara simply smiled politely and continued eating, unaware that the first domino was about to fall. Monday morning arrived with merciful normalcy. Barbara woke before the alarm, her body accustomed to early risings despite the emotional exhaustion from the weekend. Christopher lay beside her, snoring softly, oblivious to the storm brewing within his wife. She slipped quietly from the bed, moving through their luxury apartment with practiced silence. The coffee machine hummed to life under her touch, its gentle whirring a comforting constant in a life increasingly filled with uncertainties. Barbara leaned against the granite countertop, watching dawn break over the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The view had been Christopher's primary selling point when they purchased the apartment 2 years ago, a status symbol more than a home. 3,000 square feet of prime real estate. he'd boasted to his parents during their first dinner here. Worth every penny. Barbara had smiled and nodded, ignoring the twinge of concern about the mortgage that stretched their finances to the limit. Her phone chimed with an email notification. The quarterly performance reviews were due this week. 14 department heads waiting for her assessment. Work, at least, made sense. Numbers didn't lie, performance metrics couldn't be gaslighted, and corporate hierarchies followed predictable patterns. Unlike marriage. "You're up early." Christopher's voice startled her. He stood in the kitchen doorway, hair tousled from sleep, looking deceptively normal. Handsome, even, with his strong jawline and the charisma that had initially drawn her to him. "Big week at work." Barbara poured a second cup of coffee and handed it to him. "A peace offering of sorts. Always is with you." There it was, the subtle dig disguised as observation. "Don't forget, I have that client dinner Wednesday. Wear something less corporate, if you can manage it." Barbara nodded, swallowing the automatic defense that rose to her lips. She'd long ago learned that engaging only prolonged these interactions. "Mom called this morning," Christopher continued, scrolling through his phone with one hand. "Wanted to know if you got Jennifer's book recommendation. I haven't had time to look at it." Christopher glanced up, his expression a practiced mixture of concern and disappointment. "You know they're just trying to help, Barb. Maybe if you weren't so defensive all the time." She turned away, ostensibly to prepare her breakfast, but primarily to hide the flash of anger in her eyes. "I need to get ready for work." Running away from the conversation. Typical. Barbara paused at the kitchen threshold. "We can talk later, Chris. I have a 9 o'clock meeting." His response was to turn his attention back to his phone, dismissing her with his silence. 40 minutes later, Barbara sat in her office at Westfield Financial, reviewing departmental budgets with the focus that had earned her a reputation as the company's most effective administrator. The floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office offered a panoramic view of the city, a testament to her professional success that contrasted sharply with her crumbling personal life. "Barbara?" Her assistant Michael appeared at the door. "The budget committee is ready for you in conference room A." "Thank you. I'll be right there." She gathered her tablet and notes, straightening her navy blue blazer, armor for the corporate battlefield. The meeting proceeded efficiently, with Barbara guiding the discussion through complex financial projections with the ease of someone who understood not just the numbers, but the people behind them. This was where she excelled, creating order from chaos, finding solutions to seemingly insurmountable problems. "Excellent work as always, Barbara," remarked Gerald Westfield, the company's CEO, as the meeting concluded. "Your analysis of the third-quarter projections gave us exactly the clarity we needed." She accepted the compliment with a professional nod, while inside, a small voice wondered why such acknowledgments felt hollow lately. There had been a time when professional recognition filled her with satisfaction, but now it seemed to highlight the stark contrast between her work life and home life. Back in her office, Barbara found herself staring at her wedding photo, prominently displayed on her desk. It had been taken 2 years ago, Christopher beaming with pride, her own smile radiant with hope. What had happened to that couple? When had the cracks started to form? Her phone buzzed with a text from Christopher. "Transferring money to joint account for mortgage payment. Password?" Barbara frowned. The mortgage payment had been processed last week. She'd handled it herself, as she did most of their financial matters. She typed back, "Already paid it. Last Thursday." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, right, forgot. Something about the exchange felt off, but Barbara had little time to dwell on it as her afternoon schedule filled with back-to-back meetings. It wasn't until nearly 6 o'clock that she finally had a moment to breathe. "Heading out?" Michael asked, poking his head into her office. "Soon. Just need to finish these compliance reports." "Don't stay too late. Even company superstars need rest." He gave her a friendly smile before departing. Barbara turned back to her computer, but Christopher's text about the mortgage payment continued to nag at her. On impulse, she logged into their joint bank account. something she hadn't done in several weeks, having delegated the task of bill payments to their automated system. What she saw made her stomach drop. Their account balance was significantly lower than it should have been. Barbara clicked through the transaction history, her administrative mind immediately sorting the data into patterns. Multiple withdrawals to unfamiliar accounts, several transfers to what appeared to be online payment processors, a recurring charge to a subscription service she didn't recognize. Barbara sat back in her chair, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a case of overspending or poor money management. These transactions suggested something else entirely, something Christopher had been deliberately hiding from her. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Christopher's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," she answered, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I'm still at work." "No problem. Just wanted to let you know I'll be late tonight. Client meeting ran over, and now we're grabbing drinks." "Which client?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. A pause. "Hanson Media." "Why?" Barbara knew Christopher's client roster intimately. He'd made sure of that, repeatedly quizzing her before company functions so she wouldn't embarrass him by forgetting important details. Hanson Media wasn't on that list. "No reason. Have fun." She ended the call before he could respond, then turned back to the bank statements on her screen. With methodical precision, Barbara began categorizing the unusual transactions, creating a spreadsheet that tracked dates, amounts, and destinations. The administrator in her took over, temporarily suppressing the wife who didn't want to believe what the numbers were telling her. 2 hours later, she had her answer, or at least part of it. Over the past 6 months, nearly $15,000 had disappeared from their joint account, funneled into what appeared to be online gambling sites. Another 1,500 had gone to subscription services with vague, generic names but hefty monthly fees. Barbara sat in her darkened office, the spreadsheet glowing accusingly on her screen. The pieces were starting to fit together. Christopher's increasing secretiveness about finances, his late nights, his deflection techniques whenever she brought up money concerns. All this time, he'd been projecting his issues onto her, creating a narrative where she was the problem in their marriage. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Christopher. "Don't wait up. Meeting running late." Barbara stared at the message, a cold clarity washing over her. For months, she'd been questioning herself, internalizing Christopher's criticisms, believing that she was somehow deficient as a wife. Now, staring at the evidence of his deception, something shifted inside her. The same tectonic movement she'd felt at the family barbecue, but stronger now, more defined. She gathered her things and left the office, her mind racing with questions and realizations. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk, a physical shock that matched her emotional state. Barbara hailed a taxi, giving the driver their apartment address. "Actually," she said suddenly, changing her mind, "take me to the Westmont Hotel instead." 20 minutes later, she stood in the hotel's elegant lobby, her administrator's mind still working through probabilities and scenarios. If Christopher was lying about client meetings, where was he really going? And if he was gambling away thousands of dollars online, what else was he hiding? Barbara approached the front desk, summoning the authoritative presence she used in board meetings. "Good evening. I believe my husband is attending a business dinner here tonight. Christopher Livingston? Could you confirm which conference room they're using? I need to drop off some documents he forgot." The concierge tapped at his computer before looking up with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have any business functions under that name tonight." "Are you certain?" "It would be with Hanson Media." Another check. "No, I'm afraid not. We do have their annual conference next month, but nothing tonight." "I see, thank you." Barbara turned away, her suspicions confirmed. Christopher was lying. But about what? And why? As she left the hotel, a new determination settled over her. Tomorrow, while Christopher was at work, she would do something she'd never done before. She would search his laptop. The thought made her uncomfortable, running counter to her deeply ingrained respect for privacy and boundaries. But the evidence was mounting that her husband had already shattered those boundaries with his deception. Back in the taxi, Barbara stared out at the city lights, each one representing a life, a story, a truth. Somewhere in that glittering landscape of secrets and lies was the reality of her marriage, a reality she was finally ready to face. What she didn't know, as the taxi pulled up to their apartment building, was that the truth would be far worse than she imagined. Morning light filtered through the blinds as Barbara lay awake beside Christopher, listening to his rhythmic breathing. Sleep had eluded her most of the night, her mind racing through the implications of what she'd discovered. The clock on the nightstand read 6:15, 45 minutes before Christopher's alarm would sound. She slipped from the bed with practiced silence and padded to the kitchen, her bare feet cool against the hardwood floors. The coffee machine hummed to life, its familiar routine offering a small comfort amid the chaos of her thoughts. Barbara leaned against the counter, cradling her mug between her palms. Through the window, the city was coming alive, unaware of the small drama unfolding in the Livingston apartment. She watched a jogger navigate the sidewalk below, wondering if that person's life held similar hidden truths, or if it was only hers that seemed to be constructed on foundations of sand. Her phone chimed softly, a reminder about an early conference call she'd scheduled with the Tokyo office. Work would have to wait. Today, Barbara had a different mission. The shower started in the master bathroom. Christopher would take exactly 12 minutes to shower, another 10 to dress and style his hair, followed by 15 minutes for breakfast before leaving for work at 7:30. His routine was as predictable as the sunrise, a realization that sent a chill through Barbara despite the steaming coffee in her hands. How well she knew this man who was essentially a stranger. At precisely 7:27, Christopher appeared in the kitchen, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit and burgundy tie. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed his own fiction, the successful marketing professional, the devoted husband, the man with nothing to hide. "You're up early," he commented, pouring himself coffee. "Tokyo conference call," Barbara replied, the lie coming easily. "I need to handle it from home before heading to the office." Christopher nodded absently, his attention already on his phone. "I might be late again tonight. Quarterly planning sessions." "Of course." Barbara kept her voice neutral, suppressing the urge to confront him with what she knew, or suspected. Not yet. She needed more evidence. "You know what these sessions are like," he continued, buttering a piece of toast. "Endless presentations, departmental politics. Andrews is pushing for a bigger slice of the budget again." The casual lie hung between them, invisible but tangible. Barbara wondered how many such fabrications she'd accepted without question over the years. "Good luck with that," she said, managing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. At 7:32, Christopher kissed her cheek, a gesture as empty as his words, and left for work. Barbara waited 10 minutes to ensure he wouldn't return for something forgotten, then moved with purpose toward his home office. The room was meticulously organized, another facade. The large mahogany desk dominated the space, Christopher's laptop conspicuously absent. He'd taken it to work. Barbara opened the desk drawers methodically, finding nothing unusual until she reached the bottom right drawer. Beneath a stack of manila folders lay a second laptop, older, its surface scratched from use. Barbara stared at it, her heart pounding. Why would Christopher need a second laptop? And why keep it hidden? With trembling fingers, she lifted it from the drawer and opened the lid. The screen came to life, requesting a password. Barbara hesitated, guilt warring with determination. Was she really going to do this? Invade Christopher's privacy so completely? The memory of the bank statements steeled her resolve. The truth, however painful, was preferable to living a lie. What would Christopher use as a password? Barbara tried his birthday. Access denied. His childhood street address. Access denied. Their wedding date. Access denied. She sat back, frustrated, but not surprised. Christopher was too careful for such obvious choices. Her eyes scanned the office, searching for inspiration. On the bookshelf stood a small trophy, Christopher's pride and joy from his college days. Theta Chi Marketing Challenge Champion, read the inscription. Barbara typed Theta Chi Champ into the password field. Access denied. She tried variations, Theta Chi Winner, Marketing Champ, with no success. Finally, on a hunch, she typed Theta Chi Champ 2012, the year he'd won the award. The screen changed, granting access. Barbara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The desktop appeared, cluttered with icons and folders. Where to begin? She started with the browser history, her administrator's mind organizing the data even as her wife's heart braced for what she might find. The pattern became clear almost immediately. Multiple daily visits to gambling sites, poker, sports betting, casino games, hours spent on platforms with innocuous names that, when searched, revealed themselves to be adult content subscription services. The browser's password manager revealed the extent of Christopher's digital life: accounts on 12 different gambling platforms, memberships to numerous adult content sites, forum profiles for online communities dedicated to both activities. Barbara's stomach churned, but she pressed on, opening his email account. More revelations, confirmation emails for wire transfers, payment receipts, promotions for VIP gambling experiences, correspondence with customer service representatives regarding disputed charges. And then she found something that made her blood run cold. An email thread with someone named Marcus Delgado, the subject line reading, Payment Plan Options. Barbara opened it, scanning the increasingly threatening tone of the messages. Final notice, read the most recent email from 3 days ago. $15,000 due by end of month or we escalate. You know the terms. Loan shark. The realization hit Barbara with stunning clarity. Christopher had borrowed money from a loan shark to cover his gambling debts. She continued searching, uncovering bank statements for accounts she hadn't known existed, credit card statements showing massive cash advances, and most disturbing of all, documents indicating their apartment had been used as collateral for a personal loan from a company called Fast Cash Solutions. Barbara sat back, overwhelmed by the scope of Christopher's deception. Their financial security, their home, their future, all of it had been compromised without her knowledge. As she was about to close the laptop, a calendar notification popped up on the screen. Dr. Harrison, 2 p.m. The name was unfamiliar, but something about the entry caught Barbara's attention. She opened the calendar app, finding similar weekly appointments dating back 4 months. A quick search revealed that Dr. Andrew Harrison was a therapist specializing in addiction treatment, with an office downtown. Christopher was seeing a therapist? The revelation was so unexpected that Barbara almost laughed. All this time, he'd been projecting his issues onto her, making her feel inadequate when he was the one seeking help. But why keep it secret? And more importantly, why continue the destructive behaviors if he was in treatment? She returned to the email account, searching for correspondence with Dr. Harrison. Several threads appeared, containing appointment confirmations and, Barbara hesitated before clicking, session summaries. The ethical implications of reading someone's private therapy notes gave her pause, but the stakes were too high now. Her financial security, her home, her reputation, all were at risk. The emails revealed a man struggling with impulse control disorders, using adult content as an escape mechanism, and gambling to generate excitement that he claimed was missing from his life. Most disturbing were the therapist's notes about Christopher's displacement behaviors, projecting his own inadequacies onto his wife to avoid facing his issues. Patient continues to externalize responsibility, read one assessment. Describes wife as cold and controlling when confronted with evidence of his own problematic behaviors. Resistance to accountability remains primary obstacle to progress. The words blurred as tears filled Barbara's eyes, not of sadness, but of vindication and anger. For 2 years, she'd internalized Christopher's criticisms, believing something was fundamentally wrong with her. The gaslighting had been so effective that she'd sought her own therapy, convinced that she was failing as a wife. A notification sound from her phone broke Barbara's concentration. A reminder for her actual conference call with Tokyo in 15 minutes. The real world was intruding on her investigation. With methodical care, Barbara documented what she'd found, taking screenshots of the most damning evidence and emailing them to her personal account. Then she closed the laptop, returned it to its hiding place, and straightened the office to erase any sign of her presence. Back in the kitchen, Barbara tried to process everything she'd discovered. Christopher wasn't just a liar. He was an addict with mounting debts, including money owed to dangerous people. He'd put their home at risk, emptied their savings, and all while making her believe she was the problem in their marriage. The conference call came and went, Barbara participating on autopilot while her mind grappled with her new reality. By noon, she'd made a decision. She would confront Christopher tonight, offer her support if he committed to treatment, but stand firm on protecting herself financially and emotionally. She left the apartment and headed to work, her step lighter despite the gravity of the situation. Knowledge, even painful knowledge, was preferable to the gaslighted confusion she'd been living in. What Barbara didn't know as she entered her office building was that Christopher had already left work early, not for a client meeting as his calendar claimed, but to meet with Marcus Delgado about extending his payment deadline. And when that meeting went poorly, he would return home unexpectedly, his mood volatile, to find his hidden laptop moved ever so slightly from its precise position in the drawer. The confrontation Barbara was planning would come sooner than she anticipated, and it would unfold very differently than she imagined. As she sat in her office that afternoon, reviewing departmental budgets with her usual efficiency, Barbara had no way of knowing that in just a few hours her carefully controlled world would explode in ways she couldn't predict, and that the aftermath would force her to make the most difficult decision of her life. The first hint came at 3:15, when her assistant Michael appeared at her office door, his expression concerned. "Barbara, your husband is on line 1. He sounds upset." She thanked him with a nod, her stomach tightening as she reached for the phone. "Christopher? You went through my computer." His voice was dangerously quiet. Barbara closed her eyes briefly. "We need to talk. Not over the phone." "Damn right we do. I'm at home. Now." The line went dead. Barbara sat motionless for a moment, calculating her options. Christopher rarely showed anger directly. His weapons of choice were sarcasm, mockery, and passive aggression. This cold fury was new and unpredictable. She gathered her things and informed Michael she was leaving for the day. The drive home felt surreal, as if she were watching herself navigate traffic toward a confrontation that would change everything. As Barbara rode the elevator to their floor, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. For too long, she'd allowed Christopher's narrative to define her. Today, armed with the truth, she would reclaim her story. She couldn't know that beyond their apartment door, Christopher was destroying evidence, deleting emails, clearing browser histories, shredding documents. But some truths couldn't be erased so easily, and the reckoning that awaited them both would expose secrets that neither was fully prepared to face. The apartment was unnaturally quiet when Barbara entered. No television noise, no music, no sounds of Christopher moving about, just the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant city sounds filtering through the windows. She placed her keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, the soft clink unnaturally loud in the silence. "Christopher?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, steady despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. He appeared in the hallway like an apparition, leaning against the wall with deceptive casualness. His tie was loosened, top button undone, hair slightly disheveled. Subtle signs of distress that Barbara had learned to recognize over years of studying his moods. "How long have you been spying on me?" The question was delivered with chilling calm. Barbara set down her purse, buying time to compose her thoughts. I wasn't spying. I was protecting myself. By invading my privacy? Going through my personal computer? His voice remained controlled, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, a warning sign. After I found unexplained withdrawals from our joint account? Yes. Barbara moved to the living room, refusing to have this conversation in the narrow confines of the entryway. Distance felt necessary, protective. Christopher followed, maintaining the space between them. So you admit it? Yes, I looked at your hidden laptop, and I found evidence of gambling debts, adult content subscriptions, loans from dangerous people, and our apartment being used as collateral without my knowledge or consent. The words tumbled out with surprising ease, each one lifting a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. I also found your therapy records with Dr. Harrison. A flash of something. Shame, anger, crossed Christopher's face before his expression hardened again. You had no right, and you had no right to put our financial security at risk without telling me. You had no right to use our home as collateral. You had no right to make me believe I was the problem in this marriage when you've been struggling with addictions you've hidden from me. Barbara's voice rose slightly before she reined it in. Emotional outbursts would only give him ammunition. Christopher moved to the bar cart in the corner, another warning sign. Barbara watched as he poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, noting the slight tremor in his hands. You don't understand, he finally said, his back still to her. The pressure I'm under. I understand more than you think, Barbara interrupted, surprising them both with her assertiveness. I understand displacement. I understand projection. I understand how you've been making me the scapegoat for your own issues. He turned then, eyes narrowing. Been reading my therapy notes thoroughly, I see. Yes, I have. And I've learned that while I've been blaming myself for our problems, believing your narrative that I'm cold and inadequate, you've been lying about nearly everything. Christopher took a long drink, then set the glass down with deliberate care. What exactly do you want, Barbara? Money? The apartment? Is this your play for divorce leverage? The question caught her off guard. Divorce hadn't been her immediate thought. Confrontation, intervention, healing had been her focus. But Christopher had jumped straight to the dissolution of their marriage, revealing perhaps more than he intended about his own perspective. What I want, she said carefully, is honesty. I want to understand how we got here. I want to know if there's anything left worth saving. A bitter laugh escaped him. Always the pragmatic administrator. Even our marriage is just another project for you to manage. The familiar tactic, twisting her words, making her strengths into flaws, no longer had power over her. Barbara recognized it now for what it was. Deflection. This isn't about me, Christopher. It's about the $15,000 you owe to a loan shark. It's about the documents I found showing you've remortgaged our apartment without my signature, which, by the way, is fraud. It's about the 4 hours a day you spend on adult websites while telling your family I'm the one with intimacy issues. His face flushed with anger. You don't know what you're talking about? Actually, I do. Barbara's voice remained steady. I'm an administrator, remember? Analyzing data is what I do. And the data shows a man in serious trouble who's been blaming his wife instead of facing his problems. Christopher's glass hit the bar cart with enough force to make the other bottles rattle. So that's it? You've made your assessment, compiled your report? What's the verdict, Barbara? Am I just another failed project for you? That depends on you. She took a step forward, maintaining eye contact. Are you willing to admit you have a problem? Are you willing to get real help? Not just go through the motions with Dr. Harrison while continuing the same behaviors? Are you willing to stop using me as your emotional punching bag? For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in Christopher's eyes, a glimpse of the man she'd fallen in love with, the man still buried somewhere beneath layers of addiction and deception. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the defensive mask she'd grown to know all too well. This is ridiculous. You snoop through my private things, make wild accusations, and then position yourself as my savior? He poured another drink. Classic Barbara, always needing to be right, always needing to be in control. The words hit their mark, an old insecurity she'd worked hard to overcome. But this time, Barbara recognized the manipulation for what it was. "I've made an appointment with a financial advisor for tomorrow," she said, changing tactics. "I need to understand exactly what our situation is and what options we have. I'd like you to come with me." Christopher's laugh was harsh. "So you can humiliate me?" "No thanks." "So we can start fixing this together," Barbara corrected. "But if you refuse, I'll go alone. Either way, I'm taking control of our finances immediately." "You can't do that." "Actually, I can. As of this morning, I've frozen our joint accounts and credit cards. I've transferred my personal savings to an account you can't access, and I've consulted with a lawyer about the fraudulent remortgage of our apartment." The color drained from Christopher's face. "You what?" "I'm protecting myself," Barbara said simply. "Something I should have done a long time ago." Christopher's expression darkened. "You think you're so clever, don't you? The perfect Barbara Livingston, always one step ahead." He moved closer, invading her space. "Did it ever occur to you that I need those accounts for legitimate business expenses? That you might be sabotaging my career with your paranoia?" Barbara held her ground. "Any legitimate expenses can be approved by me until we sort this out. And we both know your career isn't the issue here." "You sanctimonious bitch!" The words were whispered, almost gentle in their delivery, which made them all the more menacing. Barbara flinched, but didn't retreat. "Name-calling won't change the facts, Christopher. You need help, and our marriage needs truth if it has any chance of surviving." He turned away abruptly, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "What do you want from me? A full confession? Fine. Yes, I gamble. Yes, I watch adult content. Yes, I've made some financial decisions without consulting you. Is that what you needed to hear?" "It's a start," Barbara acknowledged, "but it's not just some financial decisions. You've put us $15,000 in debt to a loan shark. You've committed fraud by remortgaging our home without my consent. You've been systematically draining our accounts while making me believe I'm the problem in our marriage. These aren't small infractions, Christopher. They're serious breaches of trust." He was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the cityscape below. When he finally spoke, his voice had a defeated quality that Barbara had never heard before. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad." It was the closest thing to an admission she'd heard, and Barbara felt a momentary surge of hope. Perhaps there was a path forward after all. "I believe you," she said carefully, "but intention doesn't change our reality. We need professional help, financial counseling, addiction therapy, marriage counseling if we want to save this relationship." Christopher turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "And if I refuse?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Barbara had been preparing for this moment since she'd discovered the truth, had rehearsed her answer during the drive home. Still, saying the words aloud felt momentous. "Then I'll have no choice but to file for divorce and protect myself legally." Christopher's laugh was hollow, always so clinical, so detached. "Do you even care about me at all? Or am I just a failing investment you're ready to dump?" The question stung, but Barbara recognized it as another deflection tactic. "I've spent 2 years believing I was failing you, Christopher. I've endured public humiliation from you and your family. I've questioned my worth as a wife, as a woman, as a person. And still, I'm standing here offering to help you through this if you're willing to do the work. If that's not caring, I don't know what is." Something shifted in Christopher's eyes, a flash of recognition, perhaps even remorse, but it was quickly replaced by his practiced defensiveness. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple at all," Barbara countered. "It's going to be incredibly difficult, but continuing as we are isn't an option. Not anymore." Christopher moved to the sofa and sat heavily, suddenly looking exhausted. I need time to think. Barbara nodded. I understand. But we don't have much time. Marcus Delgado is expecting $15,000 by the end of the month, according to the emails I found. That's less than 2 weeks away. At the mention of Delgado's name, Christopher's head snapped up. You contacted him? No, but I saw the threatening emails. Who is he, Christopher? What kind of danger are we in? Christopher ran a hand over his face. He's not someone you want to know, and if you've frozen our accounts, you've just made things much worse. A chill ran down Barbara's spine. Then help me understand what we're dealing with. Let me help you fix this. For a moment, it seemed Christopher might finally open up, might finally share the full truth of their situation. But, as quickly as the vulnerability appeared, it vanished behind his walls of denial and deflection. I don't need your help, he said, standing abruptly. I'll handle Delgado my way. As for the rest, the gambling, the adult content, those are my business, not yours. Barbara felt the last glimmer of hope fade. They became my business when you started blaming me for your issues, when you humiliated me in front of your family, when you made me believe I was frigid and inadequate while you were spending hours online instead of connecting with your wife. Christopher grabbed his keys from the coffee table. I need some air. Running away won't solve anything, Barbara said quietly. Neither will your control freak approach. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. By the way, my mother called earlier. The family dinner for my birthday is still on for Saturday. Try not to share your wild theories with them, will you? The casual reminder of his upcoming 35th birthday celebration, an event she'd been dreading even before her discoveries, struck Barbara as surreal. How could they possibly maintain the facade of a happy couple in front of his family now? Christopher, just be there, Barbara. 7 o'clock. Wear something nice. With that, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Barbara stood motionless in the center of their living room, surrounded by the trappings of a life built on illusions. The expensive furniture, the art they couldn't really afford, the appearances they'd worked so hard to maintain, all of it seemed hollow now. Her phone chimed with a text message. She retrieved it from her purse, half expecting to see Christopher's name. Instead, it was from Jennifer, his sister. Don't forget the bakery order for Saturday. Chocolate hazelnut, his favorite. And I'm sending you a book on spicing up your marriage. Early birthday gift for my brother. Barbara stared at the message, a strange calm settling over her. The continued assumption that she was the problem, the casual disregard for her feelings, the family's complicity in Christopher's narrative, it all crystallized in that moment into perfect clarity. Saturday's birthday dinner would indeed be a turning point in their marriage, but not in the way Christopher or his family might expect. If they wanted truth, Barbara would give them truth, all of it, in ways they couldn't ignore or dismiss. As she began composing a carefully neutral response to Jennifer, Barbara's mind was already formulating a plan, one that would finally bring the painful truth into the light, forcing Christopher to confront his demons and his family, to see the reality they'd been denying. What none of them knew, least of all Christopher, was that Barbara had reached her breaking point. The dutiful, accommodating wife they thought they knew was gone, replaced by a woman determined to reclaim her dignity, her financial security, and her truth, no matter the cost. The days leading up to Christopher's birthday dinner passed in a strange détente. He returned home late that night, sliding into bed without a word, maintaining his silence through breakfast the next morning. Barbara matched his reserve, both of them orbiting each other like celestial bodies, connected yet distant. At work, Barbara moved through her responsibilities with mechanical precision, her mind constantly returning to the decision she'd made. The meeting with the financial advisor had been revelatory and devastating. Without Christopher present, she'd laid out everything she'd discovered. Watching the advisor's expression shift from professional neutrality to poorly concealed alarm. Mrs. Livingston, he'd said finally, your situation is more precarious than you realize. The remortgage documents you mentioned, I'd like to see them. When Barbara produced copies of what she'd found on Christopher's laptop, the advisor's concern deepened visibly. "This isn't just a second mortgage," he explained. "This appears to be a high-interest loan using your property as collateral from a company that, let's say, operates in regulatory gray areas. And without your signature as co-owner," he'd paused, choosing his words carefully, "there could be serious legal implications." By Thursday, Barbara had assembled a complete financial picture of their situation, and it was grim. Beyond the $15,000 owed to Marcus Delgado, Christopher had accumulated nearly $30,000 in credit card debt across 6 different cards she hadn't known existed. The remortgage was actually a $75,000 loan against their property equity, with terms that could only be described as predatory. Most disturbing was the discovery that Christopher had been lying about his income for at least a year. His actual salary was 30% lower than what he'd claimed. The difference apparently made up through sporadic gambling wins that had long since been overshadowed by mounting losses. Friday morning, Barbara sat in her therapist's office, exhausted from nights of minimal sleep. "You've made your decision?" Dr. Ellis asked, after Barbara had updated her on the week's discoveries. Barbara nodded. "I'm going to expose everything at the birthday dinner tomorrow night." "That's a significant step," the therapist observed neutrally. "What do you hope to accomplish?" "The truth," Barbara said simply. "For 2 years, I've been painted as the problem. Cold, controlling, inadequate. Christopher's family has been complicit in that narrative. They deserve to know what's really happening. And after the truth comes out," Barbara's gaze remained steady, "then I leave, with or without their understanding. Are you prepared for the fallout? For Christopher's reaction? For his family's response?" A small, sad smile crossed Barbara's face. "I've spent 2 years preparing for other people's reactions, Dr. Ellis. Monitoring my words, adjusting my behavior, trying to be what everyone wanted. I'm done with that now." When she left the therapist's office, Barbara felt lighter somehow. The decision was made. The path forward, while difficult, was clear. That evening, as she and Christopher maintained their careful distance in the apartment, her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Livingston. "Barbara dear, remember Christopher prefers you in blue for family photos. And I've invited the Hendersons. Christopher's father is hoping to discuss some business opportunities with Thomas. See you at 7 sharp." The casual presumption, the subtle control masked as helpful advice. Once it would have sent Barbara into a spiral of anxiety and compliance. Now she simply set the phone aside without responding, focusing instead on her preparations for the next evening. As Christopher slept, Barbara sat in the living room with her laptop, meticulously organizing the evidence she'd gathered. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents, emails from Marcus Delgado, screenshots of gambling accounts and adult website subscriptions, Dr. Harrison's therapy notes detailing Christopher's addictions and deflection behaviors. She transferred everything to a secure folder on her phone, then created a backup on a small flash drive that she tucked into her purse. Whatever happened tomorrow night, the truth would finally be heard. Saturday dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect late summer day that seemed to mock the storm brewing within the Livingston marriage. Barbara rose early, leaving Christopher sleeping as she went for a long walk through the nearby park. The familiar paths and morning joggers grounded her, reminding her of a world beyond her immediate crisis. When she returned, Christopher was in the shower. She could hear him singing, actually singing, as if it were any normal morning, as if their lives weren't balanced on a knife's edge. The disconnect was jarring. They moved through the day in their separate orbits, exchanging only necessary information. "The gift is on the hall table. We should leave by 6:30 to avoid traffic." Small talk from strangers sharing space. At 5:45, Barbara began preparing for the evening. She chose her outfit with deliberate care. Not the blue Margaret had suggested, but a striking emerald dress that complemented her eyes and brought out the golden highlights in her hair. She applied her makeup with precision, her hands steady despite the gravity of what lay ahead. When she emerged from the bedroom, Christopher was waiting by the door, handsome in a tailored gray suit. For a moment, looking at him, Barbara felt a pang of what might have been the life they could have built if honesty had formed its foundation. "You look beautiful," he said, the first genuine compliment he'd offered in months. "Thank you." Barbara gathered her purse, checking once more that the flash drive was secure in the inner pocket. The drive to the Livingston family home passed in silence, the late summer evening painting the city in golden hues. Barbara watched the familiar landmarks pass by, knowing this journey represented more than just a birthday celebration. It was the final act of a marriage built on illusions. Margaret greeted them at the door, elegant as always in a navy blue dress that emphasized her still slender figure. "There you are. Everyone's already here." Her eyes swept over Barbara's green dress, the slight tightening of her lips the only indication of her disapproval at the color choice. The Livingston home was a showcase of old money and careful curation. Original artwork on the walls, antique furniture polished to a high shine, fresh flower arrangements positioned just so. Barbara had once been intimidated by its perfection. Now she saw it as another facade, another carefully maintained illusion. Vincent Livingston emerged from his study, greeting his son with a hearty embrace, before offering Barbara the briefest of kisses on the cheek. "You're looking well," he said, his tone suggesting mild surprise at the observation. The living room was filled with familiar faces, family friends, business associates, Jennifer and her latest boyfriend. Barbara accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, noting with grim amusement that it was the expensive brand Christopher had always insisted on. Appearance above substance, as with everything in the Livingston world. "Barbara!" Jennifer approached, air-kissing her cheeks. "Green is a choice." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Mom's having a minor conniption. You know how she is about the family photos? Some things are more important than color coordination," Barbara replied mildly, taking a sip of her champagne. Jennifer blinked, unused to even this gentle pushback. "Well, I suppose." "Oh, did you get the book I sent? Reigniting the Flame? The reviews say it's life-changing for women who struggle with, you know." She made a vague gesture that somehow managed to be both dismissive and condescending. "I did." Barbara maintained her pleasant expression. "I'm sure Christopher will find it enlightening when he reads it." Before Jennifer could process this unexpected response, Margaret called for everyone's attention, announcing that dinner would be served in 15 minutes. "And then," she added with a significant look at Christopher, "we have some exciting news to share." Barbara caught Christopher's eye across the room, noting his momentary confusion. Whatever announcement his mother had planned, he clearly wasn't privy to it. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, crystal and silver gleaming under the chandelier's light. Barbara found herself seated between Thomas Henderson, the business connection Vincent was cultivating, and an elderly aunt who seemed primarily interested in her wine glass being kept full. Across the table, Christopher held court, charming and attentive, the perfect son and host. Watching him, Barbara marveled at his ability to compartmentalize, to present this flawless exterior while his life crumbled behind the scenes. The meal progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Barbara ate little, her stomach tight with anticipation. She noticed Margaret watching her with narrowed eyes, interpreting her lack of appetite as another personal failing, no doubt. Finally, as dessert was served, the chocolate hazelnut cake Christopher favored, Vincent rose, tapping his glass for attention. "Before we celebrate another year of Christopher's life, Margaret and I have an announcement." He beamed at his son. "Henderson Capital has agreed to bring Christopher on as their new marketing director, with a substantial increase in salary and benefits." The table erupted in congratulations as Christopher accepted the news with practiced modesty. Barbara felt a chill run through her. Another job? when their financial house of cards was on the verge of collapse? A toast, Vincent continued, raising his glass. To Christopher, the son any father would be proud of, the businessman any company would be fortunate to have, and the husband who— He paused, his gaze sliding briefly to Barbara, with poorly concealed disapproval. Well, who works tirelessly to provide the best for his family. Glasses were raised around the table. Barbara lifted hers mechanically, her mind racing. This job offer complicated things. It offered Christopher yet another escape route, another way to avoid confronting his real problems. Speech, someone called, and Christopher rose, glass in hand, the picture of successful confidence. Thank you all for being here tonight, he began, his voice warm with practiced sincerity. Especially my beautiful wife, Barbara. He gestured toward her, the perfect, attentive husband. I know I'm not always the easiest person to live with. Gentle laughter rippled around the table. But she puts up with me, for better or worse. Christopher's smile didn't reach his eyes as they met Barbara's across the table. Even if she is a little reserved in certain areas. The implication hung in the air, followed by uncomfortable titters from the guests who understood the reference to their supposedly troubled intimate life. Jennifer snickered openly, while Margaret's expression conveyed sympathetic embarrassment. For Christopher, not Barbara. In that moment, watching the family exchange knowing glances at her expense, something crystallized in Barbara. This wasn't just about Christopher anymore. It was about an entire system that had been built to protect him, to excuse him, to elevate him at her expense. As the laughter subsided, Barbara rose smoothly to her feet, glass in hand. The unexpected movement caught everyone's attention, conversation faltering into silence. I'd like to offer a toast as well, she said, her voice steady. To truth. Confusion flickered across the assembled faces. Christopher's expression hardened, a warning in his eyes that Barbara chose to ignore. For those who don't know me well, she continued, I'm an administrator by profession. I analyze data, identify patterns, solve problems. It's what I'm good at. She set her glass down and reached for her purse, removing her phone. Recently, I've been analyzing some very troubling data in my own marriage. Barbara, Christopher's voice held a note of alarm. This isn't the time. It's exactly the time, she countered calmly. Your family deserves to know the man they're celebrating tonight. Before anyone could react, Barbara moved to the large television mounted on the dining room wall and connected her phone wirelessly. The screen came to life, displaying the folder she'd prepared. What you're about to see, she addressed the stunned gathering, is evidence of why Christopher has been describing me as cold and inadequate for the past 2 years. She opened the first file, bank statements showing withdrawals to gambling sites. Thousands of dollars disappeared over months. Christopher has lost approximately $15,000 gambling online in the past 6 months alone. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Margaret's hand flew to her throat in shock. Barbara continued methodically, opening the next file. Credit card statements showing subscriptions to adult content platforms. He spends an average of 4 hours daily on adult websites, while telling his family that I'm the one with intimacy issues. Christopher lurched to his feet. Turn that off right now. No. Barbara's voice remained level. For 2 years, I've been humiliated in front of your family. I've been made to believe I was failing as a wife. I've been the punchline of your jokes, the target of your mother's helpful advice, the recipient of your sister's condescending self-help books. All while you've been lying about everything. She advanced to the next screen, the loan documents showing their apartment used as collateral. Christopher remortgaged our home without my knowledge or consent to cover gambling debts. That's fraud, by the way. Vincent had gone pale. His earlier pride evaporated. Christopher, is this true? Before her husband could respond, Barbara opened the email thread with Marcus Delgado. He currently owes $15,000 to a loan shark, due by the end of this month. a loan shark who, based on these messages, doesn't make idle threats. The room had fallen into shocked silence. Christopher stood frozen, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. And finally, Barbara said, opening the last file, therapy records showing that Christopher has been in treatment for impulse control disorders related to gambling and adult content addiction for the past 4 months, while continuing to blame me for our marital problems. Margaret swayed slightly in her chair, looking as though she might faint. Vincent's expression had hardened into something unreadable. Jennifer stared at her brother in disbelief. "I've tried," Barbara said, her voice finally betraying emotion. "I've tried to help him, to understand, to support him through this, but he refuses to acknowledge the problem. He continues to lie, to manipulate, to put our financial security at risk." She turned to face Christopher directly. "And he continues to humiliate me, rather than face his own demons." Christopher's face had drained of color, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. "You had no right," he whispered. "I had every right," Barbara countered. "This affects my life, my future, my safety, and I'm done being your scapegoat." She disconnected her phone from the television and turned to address the stunned family. Christopher needs help, real help, not enablers who reinforce his denial. He has serious addiction issues and dangerous debts. And until he's ready to truly address those problems, I can't be part of his life anymore. Margaret had begun to weep silently. Vincent's jaw was clenched so tight, a muscle twitched in his cheek. Jennifer looked as though she'd been slapped. "I'm sorry you had to learn the truth this way," Barbara said, gathering her purse. "But I've tried every other approach, and nothing has broken through the walls of denial. His or yours." She moved toward the door, pausing beside Christopher. "I'll be staying with a friend while I look for my own place. My lawyer will contact you next week about the separation." The silence that followed her through the dining room and into the hallway was absolute. No one moved to stop her. No one called after her. They remained frozen in the aftermath of truth, too long denied. As Barbara stepped out into the warm evening air, a weight lifted from her shoulders. The path ahead would be difficult, untangling their finances, rebuilding her life, healing from the emotional damage of the past 2 years. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly free. Her phone buzzed in her purse. A text message from Vincent. "We need to talk. Not now, but soon. There are things you should know." Barbara slipped the phone back without responding. Whatever revelations the Livingston family might offer now, they came too late to save her marriage. But perhaps they might help save Christopher, if he was willing to accept the help he so desperately needed. As she hailed a taxi, Barbara caught a glimpse of her reflection in a storefront window. Straight-backed, clear-eyed, resolute. The woman Christopher had tried to diminish was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone unwilling to accept lies or manipulation, someone who understood her own worth. The taxi pulled to the curb. As Barbara gave the driver her friend's address, she felt a sense of possibility unfurling within her, a future undefined by someone else's narrative, unbound by someone else's limitations. Behind her, in the Livingston family home, a reckoning long overdue was taking place. Christopher would face his family, his addictions, his deceptions without her as his convenient scapegoat, and whatever path he chose from this moment forward would be his responsibility alone. The taxi pulled away from the curb, carrying Barbara toward an uncertain but authentic future. In the soft evening light, she allowed herself a small smile, not of triumph or vindication, but of peace. The truth, however painful, had finally set her free. 6 months later, Barbara stood in the doorway of her new apartment, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and promise. The space was smaller than the luxury apartment she'd shared with Christopher, but it was hers. Every piece of furniture, every artwork on the walls, every decision made without compromise or consideration of someone else's approval. Her phone chimed with an email notification. The final divorce papers had been processed. The financial settlement had been complicated by Christopher's debts, but with Vincent's unexpected intervention, they'd reached an agreement that protected Barbara from the worst of the financial fallout. According to Jennifer, who had reached out with an awkward but seemingly genuine apology, weeks after the birthday dinner revelation, Christopher had finally entered a serious treatment program for his addictions. Margaret had joined a support group for families of addicts, slowly coming to terms with her role in enabling her son's behavior. The family mythology of Christopher as the golden child had crumbled under the weight of reality, painful but necessary for genuine healing to begin. Barbara set her mug down and prepared for work, straightening the blazer of her new suit. A promotion to executive level at Westfield Financial had come through last month, recognition of the leadership skills she'd demonstrated even while navigating personal crisis. As she locked her apartment door, Barbara reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. Betrayal left scars that would take time to fade. But in its place had grown something unexpected: compassion. Not just for Christopher and his struggles, but for herself, for the woman who had believed herself inadequate, who had internalized others' projections, who had sought validation from those determined to diminish her. That woman was gone now. In her place stood someone wiser, stronger, and infinitely more certain of her own worth. Someone who understood that true intimacy began with honesty, and that no relationship could thrive in the shadow of secrets and lies. Barbara stepped into the elevator, ready to embrace whatever the day might bring, secure in the knowledge that her story was now her own to write. One truth, one day, one choice at a time. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.